The scream that tore through the frozen wilderness would haunt Vincent Irvine for the rest of his days, though he didn't know it yet as he reined in his buckskin mare and listened to the wind howling through the pine trees. It was December 1883, and the blizzard that had blown down from the north had caught everyone off guard, even seasoned cattlemen like Vincent, who had spent the better part of his 26 years reading the Texas weather. This storm was different, though, meaner, colder than anything he had seen in Dallas or the surrounding territories. He had been riding the fence line of the Double Bar Ranch when the temperature dropped so fast his breath turned to ice crystals before his eyes. Now, miles from the main house with darkness falling fast and snow piling higher by the minute, he heard that sound again, faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice calling for help. Vincent urged his horse forward through the drifts, his heavy wool coat doing little against the bitter cold that seemed to slice right through to his bones. The wind carried that voice again, weaker now, and he followed it like a beacon through the white curtain of falling snow. His gloved hands gripped the reins tighter as he guided his mare between the towering pines, their branches heavy with ice and snow. The forest here was dense, unusual for this part of Texas, but they were in the elevated country north of Dallas, where the land changed and the trees grew thick. He squinted against the driving snow, searching for any sign of movement, any splash of color against the endless white. Then he saw her, a dark shape crumpled at the base of an ancient oak tree, barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. Vincent dismounted quickly, his boots sinking deep into the powder as he rushed forward. The woman was curled on her side, her arms wrapped around herself, her whole body shaking so violently he could see the tremors from several feet away. Her dress was soaked through, a dark blue fabric that clung to her frame, and her long hair, brown as chestnuts, was plastered to her face and neck. She wasn't wearing a coat, no gloves, no hat, nothing to protect her from this killing cold. "Madam," Vincent called out, dropping to his knees beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and even in the dim light of the storm he could see they were the color of honey, though glazed with cold and fear. Her lips were tinged blue, and when she tried to speak, only a faint whisper emerged. "Please," she managed, the word barely audible over the wind. "You're safe now," Vincent said firmly, already shrugging out of his heavy coat. He wrapped it around her trembling form, then scooped her up into his arms without hesitation. She weighed almost nothing, or perhaps the adrenaline surging through his veins made her seem lighter. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her to his horse. Getting them both mounted took some doing, but Vincent had grown up on horseback and managed to settle into the saddle with the woman cradled against him, his coat cocooning them both as much as possible. "Hold on," he told her, though he wasn't sure she could hear him anymore. Her shivering had intensified, which he knew was better than the alternative. When people stopped shivering, that's when you lost them. He had seen it happen to a ranch hand years ago, caught out in an early spring storm. The man had simply gone still, then slipped away despite their best efforts. Vincent turned his mare back the way they had come, but he knew immediately they wouldn't make it to the main ranch house. The storm had worsened in just the few minutes since he had found the woman, and visibility had dropped to almost nothing. He needed shelter, and he needed it fast. His mind raced through the geography of the area, and then he remembered the old line shack about a mile east. It wasn't much, just a one-room cabin the ranch hands used during cattle drives, but it would have 4 walls and a roof, maybe even some dry wood for a fire. He urged his horse in that direction, trusting the mare's instincts as much as his own sense of direction. The woman in his arms had gone quieter, her shivering less violent, and that terrified him more than her earlier trembling. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough with urgency. "Don't you dare give up. We're almost there." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, but finally the dark outline of the lined shack emerged through the snow. Vincent sent up a silent prayer of thanks as he guided his mare to the small lean-to attached to the side of the structure. It was an ideal shelter for the horse, but it would keep her out of the worst of the wind. He dismounted awkwardly, still holding the woman, and managed to tie his mare's reins before carrying his burden to the cabin door. The door stuck in its frame, swollen from moisture and ice, but Vincent kicked it hard and it gave way with a groan. Inside was dark and cold but blessedly free of snow. He laid the woman down gently on the single narrow bunk built against the far wall, then immediately set about getting a fire started in the small potbelly stove that sat in the corner. His fingers were numb and clumsy, but he had started fires in worse conditions. There was a small stack of wood beside the stove, dry and ready, and within minutes he had flames crackling to life. Only then did Vincent allow himself to really look at the woman he had rescued. In the growing firelight, he could see she was young, probably around 22 or 23, with delicate features and that rich brown hair that was slowly beginning to thaw, dripping water onto the thin mattress. Her dress was of good quality, he noticed, not the homespun cotton of a ranch wife or working woman, but a finer fabric with careful stitching. She wore small pearl earrings, and on her left hand was a thin gold ring set with a tiny stone. His stomach tightened. She was married. Of course she was, a woman that beautiful, which raised the question of what she was doing out in the woods alone in a blizzard. Vincent pushed the thought aside for the moment. First priority was keeping her alive. He found a wool blanket in the storage chest beneath the bunk and spread it over her, but he knew it wasn't enough. Her clothes were soaked through, and she needed to get out of them before hypothermia took hold completely. Vincent swallowed hard. This was not a situation he had ever imagined himself in, alone in a cabin with an unconscious woman who needed help undressing, but propriety meant nothing if she died. "Madam," he said loudly, hoping she would rouse. "Madam, you need to wake up. You need to get out of those wet clothes." Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Vincent cursed under his breath and made a decision. He would remove her dress but leave her undergarments, and he would keep his eyes averted as much as possible. Working quickly and trying his best to be respectful, he managed to get the heavy wet dress off her, then wrapped her immediately in the dry blanket. He hung the dress near the stove to dry and added more wood to the fire, building it up until heat began to fill the small space. For his own part, Vincent was soaked through as well. He stripped off his wet shirt and hung it to dry, then wrapped himself in his mostly dry coat and settled into the room's only chair, a rickety wooden thing that creaked under his weight. Now, there was nothing to do but wait and hope the woman pulled through. He must have dozed off despite his best intentions, because when he jerked awake the fire had burned down to embers and pale gray light was filtering through the cabin's single small window. The storm outside had quieted, and in the silence he heard a soft moan from the bunk. Vincent was on his feet instantly, moving to her side. The woman's eyes were open, and they fixed on him with a mixture of confusion and fear. She clutched the blanket to her chest and tried to sit up, then winced and fell back against the thin pillow. "Easy now," Vincent said, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "You're safe. I found you in the woods last night during the storm. You were half frozen." She stared at him, taking in his bare chest and the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, scratchy from the cold. "Line shack on the Double Bar Ranch, about 15 miles north of Dallas. I'm Vincent Irvine, one of the ranch hands here." He gestured to her dress hanging by the stove. "I had to get you out of your wet clothes. You were shivering so bad I thought you might shake yourself apart. I tried to be respectful about it." Color flooded her pale cheeks, but she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I remember the cold and the trees and then nothing until now." "What's your name?" Vincent asked gently. "And what were you doing out in that storm?" She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, he saw they were bright with unshed tears. "Hannah," she said finally. "Hannah Zimmerman. And I was running away." Vincent settled back in his chair, giving her space but staying close enough to hear her soft words. "Running from what?" Hannah pulled the blanket tighter around herself, her gaze dropping to her hands. "From my husband," she said, and the word came out bitter. "Or rather, the man who calls himself my husband, though the marriage is barely 6 months old and feels like a lifetime." She took a shaky breath and continued. "I came to Texas from Missouri with my aunt last spring. She was ill and wanted to live out her final days with her brother who had a homestead near Dallas. I was to care for her and keep her company. She passed in June." Hannah's voice wavered. "Her brother, my uncle, he was kind at first. But he had debts, I learned. Terrible debts to a man named Thomas Cartwright who owns half the businesses in Dallas and has his fingers in the other half." Vincent knew the name. Cartwright was ruthless, a man who had built his empire on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. "Go on," he said quietly. "Cartwright came to the homestead one day in July. He looked at me like I was property, like cattle at auction. He spoke to my uncle as if I wasn't even there, said he would forgive the debts in exchange for my hand in marriage. My uncle agreed before I could even protest. I tried to refuse, but Cartwright made it clear that if I didn't agree, my uncle would lose everything, probably end up in prison or worse. So I agreed, thinking perhaps I could make the best of it, that perhaps Cartwright would prove to be a decent man despite his reputation." She laughed, a sound without humor. "I was wrong. He was cruel, controlling. He kept me locked in his house in Dallas like a prisoner, said a wife of his standing shouldn't be seen working or even going to town alone. He had servants wait on me, but they were more like guards. And she paused, swallowing hard, he was not kind in his affections." Vincent felt anger building in his chest, a hot burning thing that made his fists clench. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in ways that would show," Hannah said softly. "He was too clever for that, but yes, he hurt me. Every day I was with him was a hurt." She met Vincent's eyes directly. "3 days ago, I learned he was planning to send me away to a sanitarium. I overheard him speaking with a doctor, saying I was having episodes of hysteria, that I needed to be institutionalized for my own good. I realized then that he had tired of me, or perhaps never wanted me at all except as a way to hurt my uncle, and now he wanted to be rid of me while keeping his reputation intact. A mad wife sent away for treatment is socially acceptable. Divorce would be scandalous." "So you ran," Vincent said. Hannah nodded. "I waited until yesterday morning. There was a moment when the house was busy, servants everywhere preparing for some party Cartwright was hosting. I slipped out through the kitchen, took nothing but the clothes on my back. I didn't even have time to grab a coat. I just ran and kept running, afraid every moment that someone would catch me. I got to the edge of town and kept going, thinking I could make it to another settlement, anywhere away from Dallas. But then the storm came, and I got turned around in the woods. The cold was so terrible and I was so tired, I thought I was going to die out there." "But you didn't," Vincent said firmly. "You're here now and you're safe." "Am I?" Hannah asked, and the vulnerability in her voice made Vincent's heart ache. "Cartwright will be looking for me. He won't let me go easily." "Let him look," Vincent said, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. "He won't find you here, and even if he does, he'll have to go through me." Hannah studied him for a long moment. This half-dressed stranger who had saved her life and was now promising to protect her from a man far more powerful and dangerous than a simple ranch hand should be willing to face. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You don't know me." Vincent considered the question. Why indeed? The sensible thing would be to take her back to Dallas, let her sort out her own problems. But something in him rebelled at that thought, at the idea of sending this brave, frightened woman back to a man who would lock her away. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because I saw you out there in the snow, fighting to stay alive. Anyone with that much courage deserves a chance at freedom." Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks then, and she wiped at them with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my life." The moment stretched between them, heavy with emotion and unspoken possibilities. Vincent cleared his throat and stood, moving to check the fire. "Your dress is dry," he said, trying to inject some normalcy into the situation. "I'll step outside while you get dressed, and then we need to figure out what to do next." He pulled on his own dry shirt, buttoned his coat, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The world was blanketed in white, pristine and beautiful in the weak winter sunlight. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Vincent's mare nickered softly from the lean-to, and he went to check on her, giving Hannah privacy and himself time to think. His options were limited. He could take Hannah back to the main ranch house, but that meant explaining the situation to his boss, Wade Harrison. And while Wade was a fair man, he was also cautious. He had business dealings with men like Cartwright, and he might not want to harbor a runaway wife, legal complications and all. Vincent could take Hannah into Dallas and try to find someone to help her, a lawyer maybe, or a women's charity, but that put her right back in Cartwright's territory where he had eyes everywhere. Or, Vincent thought, he could take her somewhere else entirely. He had been thinking about moving on anyway, had been feeling restless at the double bar for months now. He had some money saved, enough to get them to another town, maybe up north to Kansas or west to New Mexico territory. They could travel as brother and sister or cousins. Keep Hannah hidden until they were far enough away that Cartwright's influence didn't reach. The door creaked open behind him, and Hannah emerged, wrapped in her now dry dress and Vincent's heavy coat that dwarfed her small frame. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, drying in waves, and even pale and exhausted she was striking. "I feel human again," she said with a small smile. "Though I'm afraid I've stolen your coat." "Keep it," Vincent said. "You need it more than I do." He studied her for a moment, then made his decision. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." "Tell me," Hannah said. "We run, both of us. I take you far away from here, somewhere Cartwright can't reach you. I've been wanting to leave Dallas anyway, see more of the country. We could head west or north, find a new town where nobody knows either of us. You could start fresh." Hannah's eyes widened. "But your job, your life here, I can't ask you to give all that up for me. You're not asking, I'm offering." Vincent took a step closer. "Look, I don't have much keeping me here. My parents are dead, no siblings, no wife waiting for me. I work cattle because it's what I know, but I can do that anywhere. You, on the other hand, you need to disappear, and you can't do that alone. A woman traveling by herself raises questions." "But a woman traveling with her husband," he paused, then corrected himself, "or her brother, that's different. That's normal." "You would do that for me?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I would," Vincent said, and he meant it with a certainty that surprised him. He had known this woman for less than a day, and yet something about her called to him, made him want to protect her, to help her find the freedom she so desperately sought. Hannah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze searching his face as if looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She must have found none, because she finally nodded. "All right," she said. "Where do we go?" They spent the next hour planning. Vincent would return to the ranch alone, collect his wages and his belongings, and tell Wade Harrison that a family emergency was calling him away. It wasn't entirely a lie. Hannah needed help, and in a way she was family now, or would be if anyone asked. He would gather supplies, buy 2 horses, and meet Hannah back at the line shack after dark. Then they would head north, toward Kansas, traveling at night when possible to avoid detection. "Will your uncle report you missing?" Vincent asked as they prepared to part ways. Hannah shook her head. "My uncle died 3 months ago. Heart attack. Cartwright made sure I didn't attend the funeral, said it wouldn't be proper for me to be seen in public in such an emotional state. I have no other family in Texas, no friends. I was completely isolated. The only people who will report me missing are Cartwright's servants, and they answer to him." Vincent felt another surge of anger at what this woman had endured. "Then we have an advantage. It'll take time for word to spread that you're gone, and by then we'll be long away from here." He mounted his mare and looked down at Hannah standing in the snow. "Keep the door barred while I'm gone. There's food in the supply chest, dried beef and some hardtack. It's not much, but it'll keep you going." "I'll be fine," Hannah said, and despite everything, there was strength in her voice. "Just come back." "I will," Vincent promised. "I'll be back before midnight, I swear it." The ride back to the Double Bar Ranch seemed longer than it ever had before. Vincent's mind raced with everything that needed to happen in the next few hours. He needed to be careful, not raise suspicions. As far as anyone knew, he had been caught out in the storm and holed up somewhere to wait it out. Nothing unusual about that. When he rode into the ranch yard, several of the other hands called out greetings and questions about where he had been. Vincent kept his answers vague, said he had sheltered in the line shack, that the storm had been worse than expected. Wade Harrison, the ranch owner, was understanding when Vincent came to him with his story about a sick cousin in Kansas who needed help. "I hate to lose you," Wade said, counting out Vincent's wages from the safe in his office. "You're a good worker, reliable, but family comes first. You need a letter of reference for your next job." "That would be appreciated," Vincent said, and Wade sat down to write one immediately. It was more than Vincent had hoped for, a piece of paper that could help him find work wherever they ended up. With his money and his reference letter tucked safely away, Vincent gathered his belongings from the bunkhouse. He didn't own much: a few changes of clothes, his rifle, a worn Bible his mother had given him, a photograph of his parents. Everything fit into his saddlebags with room to spare. He used some of his wages to buy supplies from the ranch store: flour, coffee, beans, bacon, ammunition. Enough to last them several weeks if they were careful. The hardest part was buying the second horse without drawing attention. Vincent told the stable master he wanted a pack horse for the journey, and the man sold him a sturdy gray mare for a reasonable price. Vincent loaded the horse with supplies, then waited for darkness to fall, helping with evening chores to avoid suspicion. Finally, when full dark had settled over the ranch and most of the hands had retired to the bunkhouse or headed into Dallas for a night of drinking and cards, Vincent saddled both horses and rode quietly out of the yard. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned why he was leaving at night rather than waiting for morning. He was just another cowboy moving on, a common enough sight in Texas in 1883. The ride back to the line shack was tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made Vincent's hand move toward his rifle. But the night remained quiet, and when the dark outline of the cabin appeared through the trees, Vincent felt a wave of relief wash over him. He dismounted and called out softly, "Hannah, it's me. Vincent, I'm back." The door opened immediately, and Hannah stood silhouetted against the dim light of the dying fire inside. She had been waiting for him, and the relief on her face mirrored his own. "I was afraid you wouldn't come," she admitted as he led the horses to the lean-to. "I gave you my word," Vincent said. "I keep my promises." They extinguished the fire and left the line shack behind, riding north through the cold December night. The horses moved steadily through the snow, and Vincent set a pace that would cover ground without exhausting the animals. They rode in silence for the most part, both lost in their own thoughts about what they were leaving behind and what lay ahead. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Vincent called a halt in a small grove of cottonwoods near a half-frozen creek. They would rest here during the day, sleep in shifts, then continue when darkness fell again. It was going to be a long journey. Hannah slid from her saddle with a groan, clearly sore from hours of riding. "I haven't been on a horse in months," she said, stretching. "Cartwright said it wasn't ladylike." "Well, you better get used to it again," Vincent said with a slight smile. "We've got a lot of miles ahead of us." They took turns keeping watch while the other slept, though Vincent found himself unable to rest for long. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hannah as she had been when he first found her, trembling and half dead in the snow. The image was seared into his mind, along with the gratitude and trust he had seen in her eyes when he promised to help her. What was he doing? The rational part of his brain kept asking that question. He had thrown away a steady job, was risking trouble with a powerful man, all for a woman he barely knew. But every time doubt crept in, Vincent pushed it away. This felt right in a way nothing else in his life had felt right for a long time. He was meant to find Hannah in those woods. He was meant to help her. They traveled that way for 5 nights, moving steadily north and slightly west, avoiding towns and settlements as much as possible. During the days, they camped in hidden spots and took turns sleeping. Vincent hunted when he could, bringing down rabbits and once a small deer that provided them with fresh meat. Hannah proved to be resourceful, knowing how to cook over an open fire and mend the tears that appeared in their clothes from rough travel. On the 6th day, they risked entering a small town called Sherman to buy fresh supplies and rest the horses. Vincent told anyone who asked that they were brother and sister, heading north to stay with relatives in Kansas. Hannah kept her head down, and her face partially hidden by a bonnet Vincent had bought for her, terrified someone might recognize her despite the distance they had traveled from Dallas. It was in Sherman that Vincent saw the poster. It was tacked to the wall outside the general store, and his blood ran cold when he read the words. Missing, Hannah Zimmerman Cartwright, age 23, brown hair, brown eyes, last seen in Dallas, Texas, reward for information leading to her safe return. Contact Thomas Cartwright. Vincent tore the poster down before anyone could see him looking at it, then hurried back to where Hannah waited with the horses. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Now." "What's wrong?" Hannah asked, fear creeping into her voice. Vincent showed her the poster, and he watched the color drain from her face. "He's put a price on my head," she whispered. "He's making it look like I'm lost or confused, like he's a concerned husband, but it's a trap." "I know," Vincent said, "which is why we're not staying here another minute. We push through tonight and tomorrow, put as much distance between us and Sherman as possible." They rode hard for 2 days, stopping only when the horses absolutely needed rest. Hannah bore the punishing pace without complaint, though Vincent could see the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes and the way she swayed in the saddle. On the 2nd night, when they finally stopped to make camp in a dense thicket of mesquite and juniper, Hannah practically fell from her horse. Vincent caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy," he said, steadying her. "You're exhausted, you need rest." "We can't stop," Hannah protested weakly. Cartwright is still days behind us, Vincent said firmly, and you're going to be no good to anyone if you collapse. He guided her to a spot near where he would build a fire, insisting she sit while he took care of the horses and started a small, nearly smokeless fire to heat coffee and beans. As they ate, Hannah was quiet, staring into the flames with a distant expression. "I keep thinking about how different my life was supposed to be," she said finally. "When I left Missouri, I thought I was going on an adventure. I thought I would see new places, meet new people, maybe even find someone to love. Instead, I became a prisoner." "You're not a prisoner anymore," Vincent said. Hannah looked up at him, and in the firelight her eyes seemed to glow. "No, I'm not, because of you." She set down her tin cup and moved closer, sitting beside Vincent rather than across from him. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," Vincent said, very aware of her proximity, the warmth of her body next to his. "Why aren't you married? A man like you, good-looking, kind, hard-working. I would have thought some woman would have snatched you up years ago." Vincent felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Never found the right woman, I guess. Came close once when I was 20. Girl named Sarah from Dallas. But her parents didn't approve of a ranch hand with no land of his own, and she chose their approval over me. After that, I focused on work, on saving money. Thought maybe someday I'd have my own place and then I could think about settling down." "Do you still want that?" Hannah asked softly. "Your own place?" "I do," Vincent admitted. "Not a big ranch, just something small. A few acres, some cattle, maybe some chickens and a garden. A house with a real floor and windows that keep out the cold. Somewhere to put down roots." He glanced at Hannah. "What about you? What did you want before Cartwright?" Hannah was quiet for a moment. "I wanted to matter," she said finally. "My parents died when I was young, and I was raised by various relatives who took me in out of duty rather than love. I always felt like a burden, like I was just existing without purpose. I thought maybe if I found the right place, the right person, I would finally feel like I belonged somewhere. Like I was home." "You will," Vincent said with conviction. "Once we get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can start over, you'll find that place." "Maybe I already have," Hannah said, so quietly Vincent almost didn't hear her. Before he could respond, she leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and exhaustion. "Thank you, Vincent, for everything." Vincent sat very still, barely breathing, acutely aware of Hannah's weight against him, the scent of her hair that still somehow carried a hint of soap despite days on the trail. Something was shifting between them, had been shifting since the moment he found her in the snow. What had started as a rescue, a good deed, was becoming something more complicated, something that made his heart race and his thoughts scatter. They sat that way until the fire burned down to embers, and then Vincent gently suggested they get some sleep. They had taken to sharing blankets for warmth, lying back to back under the stars with their saddles for pillows. It was practical, necessary even in the cold December nights. But tonight, as they settled down, Hannah turned toward Vincent instead of away, her face inches from his in the darkness. "Vincent," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, his voice rough. "The ring I was wearing when you found me, the one you probably thought meant I was married. I threw it away 2 days ago. I don't want any part of Cartwright, not even a piece of gold he gave me." Vincent's heart hammered in his chest. "That's good," he managed. "You should be free of him completely." "I am free of him," Hannah said. "The marriage was never consummated, not truly. He tried, but I fought him, and he decided I wasn't worth the trouble. He said I disgusted him, that I was cold. But I wasn't cold. I just didn't want him." Her hand found Vincent's in the darkness, her fingers lacing through his. "I'm not cold, Vincent." Vincent knew he should pull away, should maintain the proper distance between them. Hannah was vulnerable, confused, grateful for her rescue. Any feelings she thought she had for him were probably just a result of the intense circumstances they found themselves in. But her hand was warm in his, and her eyes were searching his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. "Hannah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We should wait. You've been through so much, and I don't want you to do something you'll regret." "What if I don't regret it?" Hannah asked. "What if this is the first thing I've wanted, truly wanted in longer than I can remember?" Vincent struggled with himself, torn between desire and duty, between what he wanted and what he thought was right. "If you still feel this way when we reach Kansas," he said finally, "when we're safe and you've had time to think clearly, then we can talk about this. But not now. Not when you're exhausted and afraid." Hannah looked disappointed, but she nodded. "You're right," she said. "You're a good man, Vincent Irvine, better than I deserve." "You deserve everything good in this world," Vincent said fiercely. "Don't ever think otherwise." They lay there in the darkness, hands still clasped, until sleep finally claimed them both. When Vincent woke at dawn, Hannah was curled against him, her head on his chest and her arm draped across his waist. He knew he should move, should wake her and put proper space between them. Instead, he let himself have this moment, this peaceful, perfect moment before the world intruded again. The next weeks of travel blurred together. They crossed into Indian territory, moving through lands that were beautiful and wild and sometimes dangerous. They encountered other travelers occasionally, but Vincent and Hannah kept to themselves, maintaining their story of being siblings heading to family. Twice, they saw groups of men who might have been looking for Hannah, and each time they hid until the danger passed. January arrived with bitter cold, and they pushed west into Kansas, following rumors of a town called Dodge City where a man could find work and people didn't ask too many questions. The journey was taking its toll on both of them. They were running low on supplies and money, and the horses were tired. But more than the physical challenges, Vincent was struggling with his growing feelings for Hannah. She was everything he had never known he wanted. Strong despite her circumstances, kind even when she had every reason to be bitter, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her physical appearance and everything to do with who she was as a person. He caught himself watching her as she went about simple tasks, memorizing the way she laughed at something he said, or the concentration on her face as she mended his torn shirt, or the peaceful expression she wore when she thought no one was looking. And Hannah, for her part, seemed to be falling in love with him too. She found excuses to touch him, a hand on his arm, fingers brushing his as she passed him his coffee, sitting closer than necessary when they talked by the fire at night. She asked him questions about his life, his dreams, his thoughts on everything from the weather to philosophy. She made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. One night, about 6 weeks after they had left Texas, they made camp beside a frozen creek in western Kansas. A rare clear sky spread above them, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. They had eaten a simple meal of beans and the last of their bacon, and now sat huddled together for warmth, wrapped in blankets. "We're almost to Dodge City," Vincent said. "Should reach it in another 2 or 3 days if the weather holds." "And then what?" Hannah asked. "Then I find work. You find a safe place to stay, maybe board with a respectable family. We establish ourselves, build new lives." Even as he said the words, Vincent felt a hollow ache in his chest at the thought of Hannah boarding with another family, of them living separate lives. "Is that what you want?" Hannah asked, turning to look at him. "Separate lives," Vincent met her gaze and knew he couldn't lie to her. "No," he said simply. "No, it's not what I want at all." "Then what do you want?" Hannah pressed, her voice barely audible over the wind. You, Vincent said, the word torn from somewhere deep inside him. I want you, Hannah. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to build that house I dreamed of and have you in it. I want to grow old with you and never spend another day alone. He took a shaky breath. But I know it's too soon, that you need time to heal from everything Cartwright did to you. And I know I don't have much to offer you, just a reputation as a good worker and some money saved up. Hannah reached up and placed her hand on Vincent's cheek, her touch gentle. You saved my life, she said. You gave up everything to help me, to keep me safe. You've been patient and kind and respectful even when I know you wanted more. You've shown me what a good man looks like, what real love could be. Tears welled in her eyes. I fell in love with you somewhere between that line shack and here, Vincent. Maybe even before that, when you wrapped me in your coat and told me I was safe. You're everything I never knew I needed. Vincent felt like he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. You love me, he asked, needing to hear it again. I love you, Hannah said, and then she kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. Vincent answered by pulling her closer, deepening the kiss, pouring months of suppressed emotion into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. Marry me, Vincent said, the words spilling out before he could think better of them. I know it's fast, I know we should wait, but I don't want to. I want you to be my wife, legally and properly. I want to protect you not just as a friend, but as your husband. Yes, Hannah said without hesitation. Yes, I'll marry you. They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. The cold night faded away as they lost themselves in each other, in the promise of a future together. When they finally settled down to sleep that night, it was as an engaged couple, their lives now inextricably linked. They reached Dodge City 3 days later. The town was rough and rowdy, filled with cattlemen and cowboys, gamblers and girls who worked in the saloons. But it also had a church and a judge and people trying to build something more permanent out of the wildness. Vincent and Hannah went straight to the judge's office, and 2 days later, on a cold January morning in 1884, they were married in a simple ceremony with 2 strangers as witnesses. Hannah wore a new dress Vincent had bought for her, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes. Vincent wore his cleanest shirt and had gotten a shave and haircut. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed Hannah with a joy he had never felt before. She was his now, truly his, and he was hers. They rented a small room above a boarding house while Vincent looked for work. It wasn't much, just a bed and a washstand and a single window that looked out over the dusty street. But it was theirs, and that made it perfect. That first night as husband and wife, Vincent was gentle and patient, erasing the bad memories Cartwright had left and replacing them with tenderness and love. Hannah cried afterward, but she told Vincent they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and finally feeling free. Vincent found work quickly at a ranch outside of Dodge City. The owner, a weathered man named Jack Morrison, needed experienced hands and was impressed by Vincent's reference letter from Wade Harrison. The work was hard but familiar, and Vincent threw himself into it, determined to prove his worth and save money for the future he and Hannah were building together. Hannah found work too, taking in sewing and mending for the women in town. She had a talent for it, and word spread quickly that Mrs. Irvine could fix anything from torn shirts to wedding dresses. The money she earned wasn't much, but combined with Vincent's wages, they were able to save a little each month. Life settled into a rhythm. Vincent would leave before dawn to ride out to the Morrison Ranch, work a full day, then return to town in the evening to Hannah and their little room. She would have dinner waiting, something she had cooked on the small stove they shared with the other boarders. They would eat together, talking about their days, making plans for the future. Then they would retire to their room and to each other, their love growing deeper with each passing day. Months passed. Spring came to Kansas, turning the prairie green and filling the air with the scent of wildflowers. Vincent and Hannah celebrated their first anniversary as a couple, counting from the night he found her in the snow rather than their legal wedding date. Summer followed, hot and dry, then autumn with its spectacular sunsets that painted the whole sky in oranges and reds. It was in September that Hannah told Vincent she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she said anything. Vincent's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around their small room, laughing with pure joy. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to be parents." "We are," Hannah confirmed, her own happiness matching his. "In the spring, around March or April." That night, as they lay in bed with Vincent's hand spread protectively over Hannah's still flat stomach, they talked about the future with new urgency. "We need a house," Vincent said. "A real house with room for a baby and maybe more babies down the road. This room is fine for the two of us, but it won't work with a child." "Can we afford it?" Hannah asked, though she knew Vincent had been saving diligently. "Almost," Vincent said. "Jack Morrison has been hinting that he might be willing to sell me a parcel of his land. 40 acres on the eastern edge of his property. It's good land with a creek running through it and some decent grazing. I could build us a house there, keep some cattle. We'd have our own place, Hannah, our own home." Over the next weeks, Vincent had several conversations with Jack Morrison, and a deal was struck. Vincent would buy the 40 acres, paying half up front and the rest over the next 3 years as he could afford it. It was more than Vincent had hoped for, and he threw himself into building their house with an energy born of love and determination. He worked his regular hours at the Morrison Ranch, then spent every spare moment on their land, felling trees and preparing lumber, digging a foundation. Other ranch hands helped when they could, and even Hannah pitched in when Vincent would let her, though he worried constantly about her doing too much in her condition. By December, as the first anniversary of their legal marriage approached, the house was finished. It was small, just 3 rooms, a bedroom, a main room that served as kitchen and parlor, and a small second bedroom for the baby. But it had a solid roof and a good stone fireplace and windows that let in the light. Vincent carried Hannah over the threshold on a cold December evening, and they made love in their own home for the first time, christening the space with their joy. Christmas that year was the happiest either of them had ever known. They had a small tree that Vincent cut from their own land, decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Hannah made. Jack Morrison and his wife came for dinner, bringing gifts for the baby. Hannah was round with pregnancy now, and she glowed with health and contentment. "You two are good together," Mrs. Morrison said to Hannah as they cleared dishes after the meal. "I've never seen a young couple so in love." "He saved my life," Hannah said simply. "And then he gave me a life worth living." On a mild March morning in 1885, Hannah went into labor. Vincent had been working with the cattle and came running when one of the Morrison hands rode out to fetch him. The midwife they had hired was already there, and she shooed Vincent out of the room, telling him to go pace somewhere else and let the women work. The labor was long and difficult. Vincent wore a path in the floor of their small main room, listening to Hannah's cries and feeling helpless and terrified. The midwife came out once to tell him everything was progressing normally, but Vincent couldn't shake the fear that something would go wrong, that he would lose Hannah after everything they had been through together. But finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, the strong, angry cry of a newborn baby. Vincent burst into the bedroom, not caring that he wasn't supposed to be there yet, and found Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "It's a boy," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Vincent, we have a son." Vincent approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving miniature fists in the air, clearly outraged at being thrust into the cold world. Vincent felt his own tears start, overwhelmed by love so intense it was almost painful. "He's perfect," Vincent whispered. "You're perfect. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for this gift." They named him William James Irvine, after both of Vincent's parents. Little William was a healthy, vigorous baby with a powerful set of lungs that he exercised frequently, especially at night. Those early months were exhausting, a blur of feedings and diaper changes and precious little sleep. But they were also filled with wonder as Vincent and Hannah watched their son grow and change, discovering his personality and his preferences. Vincent was a devoted father. He would come in from a long day of work and immediately reach for William, cradling the baby against his chest and talking to him in a low, gentle voice. He walked the floor with him when William was fussy, sang off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby to sleep, changed diapers without complaint. Hannah watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This strong, capable man who could rope a steer and break a horse was reduced to putty by one toothless smile from William. It was beautiful to see, and it confirmed what Hannah had known since that night in the snow. Vincent Irvine was the best man she had ever known. As William grew into a toddler, their family life settled into a comfortable routine. Vincent worked the land and their growing herd of cattle, slowly paying off the debt on their property. Hannah managed their home, did her sewing work, and cared for William. They attended church in Dodge City on Sundays, becoming part of the community, making friends among the other young families trying to build lives on the Kansas prairie. It was a good life, the life Hannah had dreamed of during her dark days with Cartwright. She was loved, truly loved, by a man who cherished her and protected her and saw her as an equal partner in their life together. She had a home that was hers, a son who brought her joy every single day, and the freedom to be herself without fear. Vincent, for his part, had found the purpose he had been seeking. His days had meaning now beyond just survival or earning wages. He was building something lasting, a legacy for his son and the children he and Hannah hoped to have in the future. Every fence post he set, every acre he improved, every dollar he saved was for his family, for their future. On a warm summer evening in 1886, Vincent and Hannah sat on the porch of their house, watching William toddle around the yard chasing fireflies. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, and the air smelled of grass and wildflowers. "You ever think about Texas?" Hannah asked quietly. "About what happened?" Vincent was silent for a moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I think about that night I found you in the snow. I think about how different my life would be if I had ridden a different direction, if I hadn't heard you calling for help." "Do you regret it?" Hannah asked. "Giving up your job, your life there?" Vincent turned to look at his wife, at this woman who had brought him more happiness than he had ever thought possible. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and William, this house, this life, it's everything I ever wanted and more than I ever thought I deserved." Hannah leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder, just as she had that night so long ago by the fire. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Vincent said, his arm coming around her shoulders. "You're my heart, Hannah. You always will be." They sat there in peaceful silence as darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, filling the sky with light. William eventually tired himself out and came toddling over to climb into his mother's lap, his small body warm and heavy with impending sleep. Hannah cuddled him close, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, while Vincent kept his arm around them both, his family, his whole world. 2 years later, in the spring of 1888, Hannah gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth. She was smaller than William had been, with her mother's brown hair and her father's strong features. William, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. The house that had seemed spacious enough suddenly felt smaller with 4 of them. So Vincent added on another room, expanding the house to accommodate their growing family. Jack Morrison had become not just Vincent's employer but a close friend, and he helped with the construction, along with several other men from the community. Life on the Kansas prairie had its challenges. There were drought years when the crops failed and they had to dig deep into their savings to buy feed for the cattle. There were harsh winters when the snow piled high and the cold was bitter. There were illnesses and injuries and the constant hard work that came with running a small ranch. But there were also incredible joys. William's first day of school in Dodge City, looking so grown up in his new clothes. Grace taking her first steps, wobbling across the kitchen floor into Vincent's waiting arms. Family dinners with the Morrisons and other neighbors, where the adults talked late into the night while the children played. Christmas mornings with the house full of laughter and the smell of Hannah's cooking. Summer evenings on the porch, watching storms roll across the prairie in the distance. In 1891, Hannah gave birth to their third child, another son they named Thomas Matthew. By this time, William was 6 and starting to help Vincent with small chores around the ranch. Grace was a bright, curious 3-year-old who followed her older brother everywhere and asked endless questions about everything she saw. The house got another addition, and what had started as a small 3-room structure was now a sprawling home with 5 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, and a parlor where Hannah kept her sewing machine and Vincent kept his books. The mortgage on the land had been paid off 2 years earlier, and the ranch was doing well, their herd growing steadily. Vincent was 34 now, his face weathered by sun and wind, his hands calloused from years of hard work. Hannah was 30, still beautiful, her face showing the character and strength that came from building a life from nothing. They had been together for nearly 8 years, married for 7, and their love had only deepened with time. One night, after the children were all asleep, Vincent and Hannah sat by the fire in their parlor. Vincent was mending a bridle, and Hannah was working on a quilt for Thomas's bed. The domestic scene was so far removed from that desperate flight through the Texas snow that it sometimes seemed like a dream, like it had happened to different people in a different lifetime. "Vincent," Hannah said, setting down her needle. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in the line shack?" Vincent looked up from his work. "I said a lot of things that night. You said I deserved everything good in this world," Hannah reminded him. "And I've been thinking about that lately. About how you've given me exactly that. Everything good. A home, children, love, safety. You've given me the life I always dreamed of." Vincent set aside the bridle and moved to sit beside Hannah on the sofa they had bought the previous year, a luxury they had saved for months to afford. "You gave me the same," he said. "Before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, a reason to work hard and dream big. You gave me a family." Hannah took Vincent's hand, her fingers lacing through his in the gesture that had become so familiar over the years. "We saved each other," she said softly. "That night in the snow, you saved my life, but I think maybe I saved yours too in a different way." "You did," Vincent agreed. "You absolutely did." They sat together in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the gentle ticking of the clock on the mantel. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, but inside their home it was warm and safe and full of love. The years continued to pass. William grew tall and strong, becoming his father's right hand on the ranch. Grace proved to have her mother's talent for sewing and her father's head for business, keeping meticulous records of expenses and income even as a young girl. Thomas was the wild one, always getting into mischief, always asking to hear stories about the old days. In 1895, when William was 10, he asked his parents how they had met. Vincent and Hannah exchanged glances, and by unspoken agreement, they decided it was time to tell their children the truth about their past. They sat all three children down and told them the story, leaving out the more frightening details, but explaining that Hannah had been in trouble and Vincent had helped her escape to Kansas. "So Mama was a princess and Papa was her knight who rescued her?" Grace asked, her eyes wide with excitement. Vincent laughed. "Something like that, little one, though your Mama is much braver than any princess I've ever heard of. And Papa is much more handsome than any knight," Hannah added with a smile, making Vincent blush. The children were fascinated by the story and asked to hear it again and again, though Vincent and Hannah always kept the telling gentle, appropriate for young ears. They wanted their children to know that their family had been built on courage and love, that sometimes doing the right thing meant taking risks. As the 19th century drew to a close, Vincent and Hannah found themselves becoming pillars of their community. Vincent served on the town council in Dodge City, helping to make decisions about schools and roads and law enforcement. Hannah organized a women's group that raised money for the church and helped families in need. They were respected, valued members of society, and no one who knew them would ever guess the desperate circumstances that had brought them together. In 1900, they celebrated their 16th anniversary. William was 15 now and talking about one day running the ranch himself. Grace was 12, already turning the heads of boys in town, much to Vincent's consternation. Thomas was 9, still wild but showing signs of settling into a fine young man. The family gathered for a special dinner, and after the children went to bed, Vincent presented Hannah with a gift. It was a locket, gold and delicate, with their wedding date engraved on the back. Inside were tiny photographs of Vincent and Hannah, taken by a traveling photographer the previous year. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed, tears forming in her eyes as Vincent fastened it around her neck. "Not as beautiful as you," Vincent said. "Not as beautiful as the life we've built together." They made love that night with the passion and tenderness of long married lovers who knew each other's bodies and hearts perfectly. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in their bed, Hannah traced patterns on Vincent's chest with her fingertips. "You think Cartwright ever looks for me anymore?" she asked, a question she hadn't voiced in years. Vincent was quiet for a moment. "I doubt it," he said finally. "It's been 16 years. He's probably remarried, moved on with his life. And even if he did somehow find out where you were, you're not that frightened woman in the snow anymore. You're Hannah Irvine, wife and mother, a respected member of this community. He has no power over you now." "No," Hannah agreed. "He doesn't. The only power in my life belongs to the man I chose, the man who chose me." She kissed Vincent softly. "Thank you for being that man." "Thank you for letting me be that man," Vincent replied. The early years of the new century brought changes. In 1903, Grace met a young man named Robert Fisher, the son of a banker in Dodge City. He was respectful and hardworking, and after a proper courtship, he asked Vincent for permission to marry Grace. Vincent, who had been dreading this moment since Grace was born, gave his blessing with mixed feelings. His daughter was 18, a woman grown, and Robert was a good man who clearly adored her. The wedding was held at the church in Dodge City in June of 1904. A beautiful ceremony that had Hannah crying tears of joy and Vincent struggling to maintain his composure as he walked his daughter down the aisle. Grace looked radiant in her white dress, a dress Hannah had spent months sewing by hand, every stitch a prayer for her daughter's happiness. "She's so young," Vincent said to Hannah that night as they lay in bed, the house feeling empty without Grace. "She's the same age I was when you found me," Hannah reminded him gently. "And look how well we turned out." Vincent had to concede the point. "I just want her to be happy. I want all of them to be happy." "They will be," Hannah assured him. "We raised them well. We gave them love and stability and a good example of what marriage should be. They'll be fine." Hannah was right. Grace and Robert thrived, and within a year they made Vincent and Hannah grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Hannah Grace, after both her grandmothers. Vincent was surprised by how much he loved being a grandfather, how he turned to mush holding that tiny baby girl just as he had with his own children. William, now 20, was courting a young woman named Sarah Morrison, Jack Morrison's granddaughter. The symmetry wasn't lost on Vincent, that his son was falling in love with the granddaughter of the man who had given Vincent his start in Kansas. When William and Sarah married in 1906, it felt like the closing of a circle, the completion of something that had started all those years ago when Vincent was just a young cowboy looking for his place in the world. Thomas, always the independent one, announced at 17 that he wanted to join the army. Vincent and Hannah were frightened by the prospect, but they recognized the determination in their youngest son's eyes and knew they couldn't stop him. They saw him off at the train station in the summer of 1907, both of them crying despite their best efforts to be strong. "He'll come back to us," Hannah said as the train pulled away, carrying their baby boy off to an uncertain future. "I know," Vincent said, though his heart was heavy. "He's tough. He's a survivor. He gets that from his mother." With all three children grown and gone, Vincent and Hannah found themselves alone in their home for the first time in over 20 years. It was strange, quiet, but also liberating in its way. They could eat dinner whenever they wanted, sleep late on Sundays, make love in the middle of the afternoon if the mood struck them. They were in their late 40s now, Vincent weathered and gray at the temples, Hannah with fine lines around her eyes and silver threading through her brown hair. But when Vincent looked at his wife, he still saw the beautiful, brave woman he had found in the snow all those years ago. And when Hannah looked at Vincent, she saw the man who had given her everything. In 1910, on a crisp October morning, Vincent and Hannah took a trip back to Texas. It was the first time either of them had been back since they fled in 1883. They traveled by train now, a far cry from those desperate days on horseback, and when they arrived in Dallas, they barely recognized the city. It had grown enormously, sprawling out in all directions, filled with automobiles and electric lights and all the trappings of the modern age. They didn't stay in Dallas proper, but rented a buggy and drove out to where the Double Bar Ranch had been. The ranch was still there, though Wade Harrison had passed away, and his son now ran the operation. They didn't stop in, just looked at it from the road, Vincent feeling a strange mixture of nostalgia and gratitude that his life had taken him away from this place. Then they drove further north, to the woods where Vincent had found Hannah. It took some searching as the landscape had changed with development, but eventually they found the Line shack. It was abandoned now, half collapsed, reclaimed by the forest. The tree where Hannah had been lying was still there, ancient and enduring. They stood together in the cold December air, so similar to that night 26 years earlier, and Vincent pulled Hannah close. "This is where it all started," he said. "This is where I found you." "This is where you saved me," Hannah corrected, her voice thick with emotion. "This is where our story began." Vincent kissed her, a long, deep kiss that carried the weight of all their years together, all their struggles and triumphs, all their love. When they finally broke apart, both had tears on their cheeks. "I would do it all again," Vincent said. "Every hardship, every fear, every mile we traveled, I would do it all again for you." "I know," Hannah said. "And I would run through that snow again, risk freezing to death if it meant finding you at the end." They stayed in Texas for a week, visiting old places and making peace with the past. Hannah even learned, through discreet inquiries, that Thomas Cartwright had died in 1895 of a heart attack. The news brought her no joy, but it did bring closure. That chapter of her life was truly over, buried with the man who had tried to cage her. Back in Kansas, life continued its gentle rhythm. Grace had 3 children now. William had 2, and Thomas, who had left the army after 4 years, married a woman he met in San Antonio and brought her home to Kansas. They bought a small ranch near Vincent and Hannah's property, and Thomas worked both ranches, keeping the Irvine legacy alive. Vincent officially retired from active ranching in 1915 at the age of 58, turning over the daily operations to William and Thomas while he took on an advisory role. He and Hannah spent their days gardening, raiding, visiting with their growing number of grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. The Great War came and went, touching their lives peripherally when 2 of Grace's sons enlisted. Both came home safely, thank God, though changed by what they had seen. The 20s roared by, bringing changes and challenges, but Vincent and Hannah weathered them all together, their love the constant in a rapidly changing world. In 1933, on a warm summer evening, Vincent and Hannah sat on the porch of their house, now 50 years old and showing its age but still solid and strong. Vincent was 76, Hannah was 70, and they had been together for 50 years. 50 years since that snowy night in Texas. A lifetime. "We should celebrate," Hannah said, her voice still strong despite her age. 50 years is quite an accomplishment." "Every day with you is a celebration," Vincent said, reaching over to take her hand. His grip wasn't as strong as it once was, his hands gnarled with arthritis, but the gesture carried the same love it always had. They did celebrate, with a party that brought together their 3 children, their dozen grandchildren, and their 4 great-grandchildren. The house was filled with laughter and love, with stories being told and retold, with family surrounding the couple who had started it all. That night, after everyone had gone home, Vincent and Hannah sat in their bed, the same bed they had shared for nearly 50 years. "We did well," Hannah said, looking at the photographs that covered every surface of their bedroom, pictures of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy of love. "We did," Vincent agreed. "We built something beautiful together, Hannah, something lasting." "I never thanked you properly," Hannah said, turning to face her husband, "for saving my life that night." "You've thanked me every day we've been together," Vincent said. "Every smile, every kiss, every moment of happiness. That's been thanks enough." They lay down together, as they had thousands of times before, and held each other close. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of summer and the promise of tomorrow. Inside, in their home filled with memories and love, Vincent and Hannah Irvine drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, grateful for the long, beautiful journey they had shared. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1938 at the age of 81. He simply didn't wake up one morning, his heart finally giving out after 8 decades of hard work and fierce loving. Hannah was devastated but not broken. She had known this day would come eventually, had been preparing herself for it for years. At his funeral, attended by more than 200 people whose lives Vincent had touched over his long life, Hannah stood strong and dry-eyed as she spoke about the man she had loved for 55 years. She told the story one final time, the story of how Vincent had found her in the snow and saved her life, how he had given up everything to keep her safe, how he had built a life with her from nothing. "He told me I was safe," Hannah said, her voice carrying across the crowded church. "And I was. For 55 years I was safe in his love, protected by his strength, cherished by his heart. He was the best man I ever knew, and I was blessed beyond measure to be his wife." Hannah lived another 5 years after Vincent's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She spent her days in the house Vincent had built, tending her garden and working on quilts for her great-great-grandchildren. She spoke often of Vincent, keeping his memory alive with stories and laughter rather than tears. On a cold December night in 1943, exactly 60 years after Vincent had found her in the snow, Hannah passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 80 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Her family gathered to mourn her, but also to celebrate the incredible legacy she and Vincent had built together. At her funeral, William, now 58 and the patriarch of the Irvine family, stood to speak about his mother. "My mother taught us that love is the most powerful force in the world," he said. "That it can overcome any obstacle, survive any hardship. She and my father loved each other completely and without reservation, and that love created all of us, this entire family. We exist because 55 years ago, a cowboy riding through a blizzard heard a woman calling for help and chose to stop. We exist because he said you're safe now and meant it. We exist because love is real and strong and everlasting." Hannah was buried beside Vincent in the cemetery outside Dodge City under a shared headstone that read, "Vincent and Hannah Irvine, beloved husband and wife, together in life, together in eternity. 1857-1938 and 1863-1943. The plot was surrounded by wildflowers that bloomed every spring, planted by their great-grandchildren and tended by generations to come. Their house still stood on the land Vincent had bought all those years ago, now part of a larger ranch operation run by the Irvine descendants. Inside, preserved carefully, were the photographs and mementos of their life together. The coat Vincent had wrapped around Hannah that first night, now fragile with age. Hannah's wedding dress, still as blue as her eyes had been. Letters they had written to each other during the rare times they were apart. A journal Hannah had kept, documenting their journey from Texas to Kansas and the building of their life together. On winter nights, when the snow fell across the Kansas prairie, and the wind howled like it had that December night in 1883, descendants of Vincent and Hannah would gather in that house and tell the story again. The story of how their family began with a rescue in the snow, with a cowboy who heard a woman's cry for help and chose to answer it with 5 simple words. "You're safe now." And she was. For the rest of her life and beyond, Hannah was safe in Vincent's love. It was a love that had transcended time and circumstance, that had built something beautiful and lasting from desperate beginnings. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West itself, full of adventure and danger and ultimate triumph. But more than that, It was a love story worthy of Vincent and Hannah themselves, two people who found each other in the darkness and built a light that would shine for generations. The Irvine Ranch still operates to this day, passed down through 6 generations now, each one knowing the story of their ancestors and the love that started it all. And on cold December nights when the snow falls and the wind howls, some say you can still hear it, faint on the wind, a woman's voice calling for help and a man's voice answering steady and sure. You're safe now.